Good morning, everybody. I'm Courtney Yosanka, your host, and this is Hatherleigh Behavioral Health's Clinical Conversations. Today we have two guests. We have Grace Being and Claudia Cauterucci, and they co-authored the book Healing from Narcissistic Abuse, Rebuild from Relationship Trauma and Find Your Light Again. A few housekeeping before we get started. If everybody could please mute themselves. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll do our best to respond throughout the program. And with that, we would like to get started. So Grace and Claudia, thank you again for being here. And if you guys want to start with just a little intro about yourself and also what started the process for writing this book together.
Okay, thank you, Courtney, for having us here. Very excited to speak about the book. So I'm Grace. I'm a singer and an author, among many other roles that I play in society. And I wanted to write the book. I remember still when I got the idea to start writing the book. It was a few years ago when I was still going through the healing process and I was really struggling. I was absolutely broken. And I thought that what a shame it would be that I went through this experience and nothing good came out of it. So, when I started my healing journey, I started doing a lot of research about the psychology of narcissistic personality disorder to educate myself because I knew nothing about it. And everything started falling into place. I started to make sense out of things. And I thought, what a great idea it would be to put all of this and what I'm finding helpful along the way in a book. And that is how I decided to write the book.
Thank you. And I have to say, I applaud you for taking such a proactive role in your healing process. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, again, I thank you for sharing your very personal, story with us. I think it gives us a very clear insight on what it's like to be in a relationship that way. Now,
Thank you.
Claudia, you come from the clinical lens, and the book is put together very nicely developed. It's a great balance between personal memoir and that clinical perspective. So, Claudia, how did you get involved in this process, and what was your role in the book?
Okay, thank you so much, Courtney. And Grace, I just want to thank you because really your level of share in the book is quite inspiring. And even as I'm listening to you, keep thinking that the wound is the gift, and you really did gift us with your process. Anyway, I'm Claudia Cauterucci. I'm a clinical psychotherapist based out of Washington, D.C. I've been doing this for 25 years. And not only I've experienced a lot of narcissism in my life, in my personal life, but I have also worked with narcissistic personality disorder in the clinical setting. And that's quite a feat. It's quite a feat because of everything that we describe in the book. And it was such a pleasure. Grace reached out to me about 3 years ago and said, "Hey, I've been seeing your stuff. It looks like we have a lot of resonance," because I do talk about it. And I talk about it from a very particular approach. It's a sort of a signature approach that I call the small is in the all and the all is in the small. Grace and I discuss it in terms of the relationship, a primary relationship between two people. But I think this idea of narcissistic dynamics goes out to communities, organizations, cults, systems, governments.
Mm-hmm.
It really has a way of mutating itself into basically a belief system and a way of behaving in the world. So what we can learn from two people, we can actually expand out into larger groups. Did I answer the questions?
You sure did. Thank you. And I think it is a timely book now. And I think, like you said, even if you're not in a relationship with a narcissist or it's not like an immediate family member, you can still recognize, narcissistic behaviors. And this book also helps, figuring out how to, communicate with somebody like that. And I know a lot of people on the call are clinicians, so we would really like to dive into, that healing process and how we best help our clients, because I think some come to us when they're still in the relationship, but a lot come to us after.
Mm.
And sometimes we think, and sometimes the client thinks too, okay, I'm done with the relationship. I should be feeling better now. And maybe though, you're not physically in the relationship anymore, mentally and emotionally, you're still there. And a lot of times we have that, the self-blame. So a lot of times, survivors of this type of relationship struggle to name their experience or even recognize it. And it seems like Grace, like I said before, did a lot of work on her own to kind of figure this out and to find meaning, in a not great situation. But if we don't have that yet, how do you help people, recognize this type of abuse and relationship without blaming themselves?
Yeah, so you're asking me how I like managed to do this,
Hmm.
right? Um, I struggled a lot with self-blame in the beginning. However, I realized and I had to find self-forgiveness that I was unconscious of what was happening. So in the beginning, it took me around 3 years to understand what was happening. And only because a friend of mine pointed it out and said, I think your boyfriend is a narcissist. And I said, what is that? So before there was even less knowledge and less awareness about these types of dynamics. And this is how I discovered what it was.
Hmm.
But of course, it's easier said than done that once you realize that what is happening, it's one thing to become aware, and it's another to build up the courage to leave.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
there's a lot of work that needs to be done because of what's happening with trauma bonding, with the sense of helplessness that you feel when you're being abused and manipulated, the amount of cognitive dissonance that you experience, because when you're dealing with narcissists, they tend to fluctuate between having good periods and good moments with you and then facing the complete opposite. And so your brain is very confused because you have two opposing realities that are conflicting with each other.
Mhm.
And you don't know what to believe. You're still trying to maybe make sense out of things. And it's very difficult. It takes a great deal of compassion from yourself, but also from others. So when it comes to therapists, I really admire my therapist because I've worked with different types of therapists, and there was one in particular that put an ultimatum and told me, unless you leave this person, I will not work with you, or it was something like this. And I understand that maybe this triggered something in the therapist herself. But for me, I was like, how can I work with you? This is not gonna work. I feel judged, I feel shamed, and this is not helping me. So the therapist really needs to have a great deal of compassion and understand what the person is going through and empathize. If you've never experienced this, to try and empathize and understand that there is a process that the victim needs to go through, and only when he or she is ready will they make the decision if they decide to leave.
Right. And we
What do
know
you think?
healing isn't linear, and it is a process and it takes a while. So Claudia, if you could speak to how do we as therapists help our client identify maybe that they are in this abusive relationship without feeling like, we are blaming them? Because a lot of times, you know, everybody asks the question, well, how could you stay in a relationship like that? Or why did you stay? And instead of that being with the kind of a judging tone, it really should be like, right, like what made you stay in that? And how do we learn more about how you came to that decision or why it's difficult to leave rather than a judging part? But all right, so the client sometimes blames themselves. So Claudia, how do you get somebody through that process at the beginning, especially if they're not aware of it?
Yes, and I will disclaim that I have a very particular approach that includes a lot of psychoeducating, because even though this impacts the whole holistic frame of an individual, meaning the mind, the body, the spirit, and the heart, it's a really overhaul of your whole holistic system. I find that the folks that I've worked with, including having a lot of conversations with Grace, having a framework, just like when your friend says, I think you're with a narcissist, it actually allows for there to be meaning. Like, oh, there is a definition to what I'm experiencing. And I really find that naming things is quite profound. It's like a meditation. But let me just say a few things really quickly. I take notes as I'm listening to things. This does simulate the abusive cycle, right? If people have been in any type of abuse, when the perpetrator or the abuser comes back with great remorse, or with, hey, let's just have fun, there is a deliciousness. One of your questions, Courtney, in your email said, like, why do people stay? There's something quite delicious that happens that people don't talk about. There's a lot of delicious feelings, and particularly in the love bombing stage, but also in the remorse stage, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose you. And that is part of the abusive cycle. And in those moments, it feels quite genuine and quite real. So that's the first part, and it's pretty insidious. I talk about it being like carbon monoxide. It starts to seep in the most mysterious of ways.
Mm.
The other thing is that I do like to do a lot of psychoeducating, is that there is a very particular match. It's a plug and socket dynamic. For the victim, I talk a lot about empaths, but for anyone who's highly sensitive or who's codependent, who felt like they had to be the savior, fixer, helper, harmonizer in the family, there's going to be a beautiful match with those wounds. And the narcissist will spot it. And because this person, someone like Grace, finally feels seen and heard, it feels like a balm to childhood wounds where they were very unseen, or maybe they were the one who had the parentified child, obviously, right? This will be a match. And so if our clients know that this is a match, that until we start healing our wounds, there will be no place for that plug to come in, that's part of the process. So I definitely do a lot of somatic healing, but also the psychoeducational frame is very helpful. Grace, would you agree to that? Like having some sort of external context?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. With everything that you said. Um, yeah, because otherwise it becomes very, very difficult to it's easier said than done. You cannot just say, I'm gonna flip my fingers and get out of it. And especially the childhood wounds that you mentioned, Claudia, when you have a person that is starving for something, like being seen, and the narcissists really know how to do this, to make you feel seen and valued. And they really know how to make you also feel like you were chosen, you are lucky to be with someone as attractive as, what kind of status they have in society. They make you feel special. And if you struggle with self-worth and self-esteem, as I mentioned in the book, you develop this sense of value and self-worth through them, because most victims, I don't want to generalize, but speaking from my experience, I didn't have a sense of identity. And so I was hitchhiking on his identity. And therefore, when we used to break up every time, I used to feel it's not just a normal breakup, but there's a loss of self because you don't have a sense of self unless you are attached to this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people as well also struggle with maybe financial dependency. And that is going to make things even heavier and more complicated because you're risking homelessness now. And I don't, I know like we're flowing into a different question. This happens naturally as we talk about these topics. But that could also be a contributing factor to why a person is staying stuck with the narcissist, with an abusive partner, and they need to find a solution.
Right. I think our behaviors serve a purpose, and that relationship serves a purpose, whether it's a healthy or unhealthy one. There's a reason, for things. And a lot of times my clients will say, when it's good, it's really good. And I was like, well, of course, when things are good, they should be really good. But how good are they when things are bad? And I think that's what you have to look at. So Grace, how did you find the strength or the purpose to leave the abusive relationship? Because like you said, there's a lot that goes into that. It's not as easy as, okay, I don't want to be in this anymore. And especially given, what phase of life you're in, that could mean financial stability. It could mean um, different things with your children, with your job. So how did you find that strength to leave? And what was that process like for you?
It took me about 2 years from the moment that I realized that he had this narcissistic personality disorder, and I had faced him with it, where he actually admitted it. And it took me 2 years where I was trying to still navigate, and I didn't want to give up. But I started doing the work while I was still in the relationship. And so this started creating a transformation inside of me where I was becoming more self-aware. Um, and things were getting louder as well in my reality. So I was having, as I mentioned in the book, terrible accident, for example, when we were abroad, and he would mock me instead of helping me and taking care of me. So things were getting really louder. My family and my friends, like nobody wanted to speak with him. There was a lot of resistance from everyone against the relationship. And I was deteriorating, like my physical health, my mental health, and I think I felt like I was hitting rock bottom. He was not changing or improving. If anything, the abuse kept getting worse and worse because these people, when they see that they can push your boundaries, they will keep pushing and pushing. There's no limits. And so I started doing the inner work. I started practicing meditation, which helped me a lot in my transformation. I started working with a person who used to do voluntary work. So he was not a therapist by certification, but he was giving me like prompts and exercises to enhance my self awareness and make me question things. He was very graceful in the way how he dealt with me. And he helped me approach the relationship with a sense of curiosity, and not only the relationship with him, but the relationship with myself, to understand what is really happening here, which is why I have a whole part in the book dedicated to why are we attracted to narcissists, to really understand what's happening inside of me, to allow such kind of behavior. And this like puts me on a path to at least start breaking free from the trauma bond.
Okay. Now, Claudia, when someone decides to leave the relationship, like we said, it's not an overnight thing. It can be a process. How do you best support a client who maybe made that decision, but now is rethinking it because it is harder than expected?
Well, one of the things that I advise, one of the pieces of work, and so I'm psychodynamically trained for my colleagues here. We do a lot of very intense work on why there might be a mental model or a relational model that they're following, right? There might have been a narcissistic parent, this idea of no sense of self, grace, or maybe the role you played in your family we do a lot of time traveling into childhood, and that has to be a part of it the whole time, because I like to say thank you triggers. We take advantage of the existing relationships to help us do the time travel. So that's a parallel process that's going on all the time. I always, in the book, I talked about if Grace had been in my if we had been working together. But I think, Courtney, a really important part is the idea of creating a plan. And this is also true for any abusive relationship, for always having a plan that's ongoing, maybe putting aside some savings, maybe having reaching out to other people, which is very hard to do because the first thing that the narcissist does is isolate you and criticize your friends and criticize your family. Like, and that, by the way, happens all the way out into the all. That's the first thing any narcissist will do, is try and isolate you from others. So this idea of building this plan brick by brick, like, who would you reach out to? Where are there resources? Where might you live? Can we put aside $1 or $2 into savings like this, in case there is that breaking point that Grace is talking about, that hitting bottom? And this you do with anyone who's in a domestic abuse situation too, is at least you have this. At least you might know where to go, who's a friend that you might reach out to. So the other thing that we talk a lot about in the book that's super important is the idea of tracking behaviors. Because not only is there a ton of gaslighting going on by the narcissist, it's a very direct technique, strategy, if all of you know how the narcissist works, but there's a way that we gaslight ourselves. And that's a really dangerous spot where we do remember only the best memories. And Courtney, sometimes we'll leave and then we're like, ah, and then he comes back or she comes back. Sorry about that. That I'm going to turn this off really quickly. And we forget. We gaslight our own memory. So the idea of tracking is super important. Even if they're journaling, I would encourage clinicians to ask them to journal, to record themselves. Grace did that. Grace actually had moments of recording conversations because the narcissist will claim that they never said that, they never did that. And some clients are resistant to that because they're saying, then I'm only tracking the bad moments. Am I creating that reality? And what I say is, like, track the whole thing, right? If this ends up being the best love story of your life and there's tons of healing between you two, there it is. You've written that story. If not, you need to go back to the moments. Grace has a very powerful moment where she's running in the street. You need to be able to go back to the moment. You need to be able to play the recording where you could hear him demean, or her, or whoever. So tracking and building a silent plan is really important during that process. I'm not sure I've responded to the full question. Did I?
You did. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I was reading the book too, it did talk a lot about self-reflection and meditation, which we know is beneficial, but it seems like it's almost too easy, right, of a thing to do to have this great change. But I think you explained it really well, where it's like you need those journaling moments and the self-reflection time and the meditation time to reflect on the entire relationship. Because you're right, with the gaslighting and then only wanting to, remember the good times, it's nice to be able to go back and say, okay, but this is how you were feeling when this happened. Or, it seemed like you had more negative experiences than positive experiences. So I think it's a good kind of clarification on how the self, journaling and the reflection and the meditation can really be beneficial, rather than just a it helps relax us. It helps bring us like focus. It's more of a like an analysis of the relationship and your part in it, and then your partner's part in it as well.
Can I add something there, Courtney?
Please. Mhm.
Okay. So I also teach meditation, and Grace, maybe you can corroborate what I'm about to say. Sometimes when we're beginners in meditation, I always say that the first layers that come up might be the negative self-talk, because if it's your first experience sitting or in stillness and silence, you might have a lot of negative self-talk, self-blame come up. The first layers might be very intense feelings of rage, of grief, of despair, even. I always say the first layers when we're beginning meditators can be pretty hard. And that's why we don't go inside. That's why it's so hard to do that process. And so, again, a bit of psychoeducating around like, hey, normal that's going to come up, self-blame, intense feelings, let it come up and out. But that those first, as I call it, like the trauma lasagna, whew, it has some intense first layers. Grace, was that your experience at all?
Yes, Claudia, thank you for raising this, because I just remembered now how I used to walk into this room with that guy that was helping me, that I mentioned in the book as well. And I remember he taught me how to meditate. I didn't meditate by myself at the beginning. And I remember I used to walk in, and the moment that I sit down in stillness and start meditating, I would just cry and weep for hours. Like, for the first hour used to be dedicated for crying, because I used to have so many painful emotions that I was even dissociating from. I developed a cannabis addiction when I was seeing the person, um, and sometimes that was the only way that I could go through my day. So I was self medicating with cannabis, and the moment that you're a bit conscious and sitting with the pain, it can be overwhelming for the nervous system, and it can be very scary. So to have someone there to guide you and support you, I think is crucial. Then yeah, you need to purge out these emotions, and it could be rage, as you mentioned, Claudia, just pain. Otherwise, they're just stuck in our bodies, and then you can create illness, high levels of cortisol. I can't even imagine what my body was going through back then. So yes, absolutely. But was it worth it? Every second and every tear, because this is the only way that you make it to the other side, and you cleanse your system, and you have a chance to create a beautiful life and get out of it.
So let's talk more about how we rebuild, ourself and our identity and, that healing process. So how do you get, survivors or victims to really reconnect with that intuition? Because a lot of times, they won't trust themselves, or they don't want to get into a new relationship, and they're not sure what is safe and what's not safe. So how do we start that process? And I guess, is that the first step in the healing process?
Yes, I will start with my experience, and then Claudia, I know that you're like an expert on guiding this. So this was one of the scariest things that I had to face as I was healing from the relationship, because because of the gaslighting and manipulation, I had, yeah, my sense of intuition was completely eroded. I think this was something that I had missing from childhood, from my upbringing, and being which made me susceptible to enter in these kinds of relationships. But then the relationship with the narcissist made it even worse, and so I was not able to trust myself and my perceptions, because he was always in denial and gaslighting, and therefore I was really scared of maintaining friendships and any kind of relationships with people, because I couldn't trust others because of what I just experienced and how malicious people can be. But then I learned that when you start reconnecting with your intuition, it will protect you, and you can learn how to trust yourself and therefore others again. How did I do this? Through a lot of like psycho spiritual work, where I used to practice different types of mindfulness practices, whether it was meditation or mindfulness of the body as well, connecting with my body through movement, mindful practices like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, and even just doesn't have to be like a complicated class that you need to go to or complicate your life. Even if you just sit with your body and direct your attention inward and notice different body parts, how they're feeling, spending time in nature, it was extremely healing for me. And I don't know how to explain it exactly, but I could feel that my intuition was getting stronger the more I spent time in nature and in stillness. And these little whispers, these little subtle feelings, when they start coming up, I started to listen to it and trust what it has to say to me or what it's telling me. And the more that you trust it, the more your relationship with your intuition improves. And now it has become so strong that I feel very confident in trusting myself and taking risks in life, even in different aspects, not just relationships, but in career. Um, and it's crucial to start, yeah, navigating life by trusting your sense of intuition. What do you think, Claudia?
That's beautiful, Grace. Beautiful. I love hearing you explain your story. I think you're a gift to folks who have gone through this, Grace, because you really have a way of articulating an experience that can feel so abstract and complex. But you really find language to it. And as we've been saying, sort of naming is a meditation in itself, right? So this, what I'd like, let me backtrack, and I see one question in the chat that's talking about empathic children. So I'm gonna maybe do a very holistic answer here. Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate talk a lot about the horror and the terror, because some of these experiences are not just scary, right? They really feel horrific or terrorizing to the system. And there, if you've never had a mental model, so the empath, for the clinician who asked that, the empathic child, the kind-hearted human, the open-hearted human, just anyone who's open-hearted doesn't have a mental model or a relational model that can assimilate sometimes the meanness or the cruelty that's coming at them. That's why it's so hard to understand the bully. It's so hard to understand Hitler. It's so hard to understand these folks that we see every day. When they inflict cruelty and abuse. So sometimes the horror and terror itself stops us because it's too hard to assimilate. So that means that we stay away from our intuition. So when you're working with a client, I like to track their moments of what I call their little revolutions as children, moments where they said no, even to a parent, moments where just little moments of their individuated self. I like to start tracking that when we're going into their teen years. Let's say they didn't want to do the drugs, or they did, some moments where they actually digressed from the system that they were growing up in. Moments of feeling like they were coming out of the closet or they were having newer instincts. So you sort of honor and validate those little moments where the true self was showing up. But when they're in the narcissistic abusive relationship, maybe the way that I might have worked with Grace is to track that too. to track moments of what I call offness with the doctor, with the coach, with the friend that's teasing you too much in the group. Something feels off. It doesn't have to be specific. It's a vibe. It's an it feeling. If you just start to validate, like, oh, this feels off. That felt off. That felt weird. That felt creepy. And someone talked about the empathic child. To validate moments of offness, we don't even need a name for it. Something feels creepy, weird, off. And then we can start naming real stuff. That felt really hurtful. That felt mean. Track it, write it. And little by little, as Grace says, like the more validation or mirroring that we can give our client of like, oh, okay, let's explore that. Let's explore why that felt off. And it is a brick by brick process of how that begins to strengthen. And one of the things that I invite my folks to do all the time is to go back, even if they did not follow their intuition, even if they stayed, to go back and highlight in their mental movie that they knew something was off. Let's say they still stayed. Let's say someone did touch them inappropriately. So let's say the narcissist, where you were like, they really praise their ex all the time. And I have to be the cool one, but that doesn't feel right to me. Even if you stayed through all of those moments, I like to highlight the fact that your intuition was right on.
Okay. So that kind of relates. We have another question. So if you can't leave the relationship, how does one heal while still being exposed all the time? So is that kind of your, treatment plan for at least they're noticing, this doesn't feel right, even though they're still in that relationship, or would it look completely differently?
Yes. Yes. A few things happen if you stay in. This one I see more often than not is what I call the zombieing out. This complete, they lose the glitter in their eye. This happens to the children as well. There is an internal death that happens because, and this actually allows for a lot of compassion for the people who stay. You almost have to start dying to the self if you're going to stay. This is one option. And this is where maybe sometimes if there's a narcissistic father where the mother does not defend or save the children, is because they themselves, the having to confront the fighting all the time. Okay, so that's one option. Not ideal because you completely lose the self if you stay. It's a slow death. And as Grace, we talked about, there's also a physical death. You will start to get diseases. You will start to die physically as well. So that's, I do address that with clients who decide to stay, is to track that. Number two, if they stay, there is a way to start building possibly a life where you individuate very slightly. You start going to more yoga classes that the narcissist agrees to, right? Because that's always part of it. You're never alone. You start to do things. You might start to paint again. You might start to, well, sadly, sometimes just saying, all right, sure. You stop the fighting, the convincing, the defending, and the explaining, because that becomes constant supply for the narcissist. But again, that is a slow death, right? You start saying, all right, yeah, sure, whatever, and building more yoga classes and maybe, I don't know, seeing one friend more often, going to the gym more, things that in the narcissistic dynamic, the narcissist feels like they're still in control, sadly.
Okay. Now, in the book, you guys talked about how to build that secure attachment as an adult. What does that look like therapeutically? And then, Grace, what did that feel like for you?
Yes, I had to come a long way to learn how to do that. It's a process that took me years working with a therapist, but also doing inner work by myself. Um, and the way that I did it personally is by challenging myself and proving to myself that I'm capable of taking care of myself. I'm capable of surviving on my own. Not only that, I'm capable of thriving and not just surviving on my own. And this is something that I had to learn how to do step by step. It feels scary, it feels messy. But growing up and developing this sense of security within yourself is messy, is difficult. Think of it as like when we're children and we have teething problems. It's painful. Growing up is painful, and but once you establish that sense of security, and it really it's a protective mechanism in itself because it protects you from becoming dependent on people like narcissists. Um, and so, through these challenges, step by step, you start becoming more resilient and trustworthy in yourself. Um, and also, I used to do, and this may sound strange, but it really used to help me, where I used to do visualization techniques, where I used to imagine that I have roots growing from my inner core down to the earth. And I used to repeat affirmations to myself where I say that I am secure within myself, I can trust myself, I am grounded, and also spending a lot of time in nature, grounding myself. That has worked wonders for me. Claudia.
Love that, Grace. I love that so much. I love it. And I teach a grounding meditation that I really, really believe in, and it includes visualizing it. So from a clinical perspective, and most of us here will really understand this, there's a mirroring wound, right? You were not mirrored by parents. You were not validated by parents. You were not looked in the eye and said, "You are my heart." You are not mirrored. And so in the therapeutic relationship, that's so important, is to establish secure attachment with the therapist who's seeing you, with who's noticing you, who's noticing shifts, that you're there for them. So it is a parallel process where the therapist becomes someone who is seeing your full self. I think before even, so the locus of control starts outside before it begins to move inside. It has to start with others sometimes. I really believe in finding others. Now, whether that's for in group psychotherapy or a survivors group or others who are doing healing work on themselves, spiritual groups, folks who are having live discussions about healing themselves in whatever format that might look, because then you feel mirrored by them too. Like I went, the group therapy principle of universality, like what 12-step programs do. Like I hit bottom too, and this is how I came out of it, also becomes this part of this root system. And then little by little, all of the tools start coming inside, all of the affirmations, being able to look in the mirror, being able to believe that you can do it on your own. Um, for my process personally, I found that took a while. It had to come from the outside first, and then I could start really developing and constructing my inner self, my attachment to me.
And you guys also mentioned learning to love yourself, and you have kind of a strategy or a practice where it's called like dating yourself. What does that actually look like?
Yes. this really helped me, like starting to date myself. I remember a time where I used to feel really shy and not confident, and there were things that I wanted to do, but I didn't find friends to go to these places or traveling even. And I started challenging myself. I made a promise to myself that I will show up to myself for myself. And I thought, wow, I invest so much time, energy, and effort. I am so devoted to other people when I'm in a relationship. How would my life look like if I switched that and directed that towards me?
Mm.
And it changed my life because I started traveling by myself and enjoying it. I started taking new classes, going on a brunch by myself, and really enjoying it, not being lost on my phone, but being comfortable in my presence. And there's so much freedom in that. When I learned how to enjoy my company and being alone, it gives you so much freedom, and you take less shit from people.
Mhm.
Because of course I still encounter narcissists in my life, but now I am in a position where I would rather go somewhere and go by myself and have fun and enjoy it than hang out with the wrong people for the sake of not being on my own. And this is so empowering and liberating. So yeah, dating yourself can be really fun. You can get creative with it. um Even like cooking for myself, before I used to think that it's a waste of time. I know that a lot of people think that it's not worth cooking because it's a party of one. But for me, spending 3 hours in the kitchen and then enjoying the meal, it means that I'm showing up for myself. I am worth 3 hours of cooking. Yes. And I enjoy it. So that's kind of, yeah, whatever you feel like doing. Um, and you have this voice inside your head, oh, what people would say about me if they see me there on my own. Um, One, we're probably imagining these things because people are thinking about other stuff and not yourself, you being on your own. But even so, more so, that what if they are judging me right now? Do I have to care about what other people think about me? They can think what they want. I'm having fun here. And that's it. Simple.
Yeah, I think you give yourself more control when you do that. And then you take away that fear of, oh, I can't be alone, right? So I have to stay in this bad relationship too. I'm actually enjoying my alone time and it's not that scary. So right, instead of choosing to be with somebody just to be with them, now you kind of have that mental filter of, okay, is this the person I want to be with? Not that I have to be with them. So I think
Exactly.
that's a great practice. I think everybody should date themselves sometimes. So we're
Yeah.
coming up on an hour, but I did want to end with, for you,
Can I
Grace.
just add like three
Oh,
words to that? I promise,
sure,
Courtney.
go ahead.
Exactly. I actually would insist on folks detoxing and spending time alone and doing this self-love. Like it is an important, especially for folks here who work with highly sensitives or empaths, they must detox their fields and their impulse and compulsion to harmonize all environments and morph to their environment. Learning how to be alone first, detoxing all of that, also establishes, Grace and Courtney, you mentioned it, courage and boundaries. You become so courageous when you love to be by yourself and you're no longer a revolving door. Literally, the courage is ridiculous. You decide where you want to go, what you want to do, who you want to eat with. Like the level of courage and boundaries, it just automatically establishes, and you get to choose who adds to my life, who takes from my life. You become much more discerning. That's it.
Right. No, great point. So Grace, now moving forward, what does being in a healthy relationship feel like for you?
So being in a healthy relationship for me, it means that I am seen and respected by the other person. And I don't need to abandon myself or my needs or shrink myself down in order to be loved. in order to be accepted, and the other person can show up for me in a healthy way without, and even when there's arguments, that we can still be civil with each other. We don't have to degrade each other or belittle each other. um and it took me a while to learn this because there was a lot of damage. But I did a lot of work with my therapist to help me not get into a kind of enmeshed relationship again, because this is something that used to happen to me, where I used to lose my needs and abandon my needs and just focus on the other person. So it's really important that when you are in a relationship, yes, you are in love and you want to spend time together, but to maintain your sense of self and your sense of identity, and to keep individuating as an adult person, so two can meet instead of getting lost in each other. So that's what a healthy relationship represents now for me.
Good. And Claudia, as mental health professionals, how can we best support people going through this process?
Of dating again, of new relationships, or of coming out? Can you?
Of dating again, kind of turning over that new leaf, kind of that new normal for them. How
Yes.
do we best support them in that?
Yes. Yeah. I think identifying some non-negotiables that were acquired from past relationships. What are my non-negotiables? If they're mean when we fight, if they're mean to others, but not mean to you. So becoming, this is something Grace and I talk a lot about in our monthly podcast, is the nuances of seeing the green flags, but the red flags very, very early. Because sometimes when someone in beginning stages of dating, if they're love bombing you, or you're just the apple of their eye, and you might be, but you might not be, they might just be testing for supply. A lot of noticing how they treat the world, how they treat others, what their past is, how they talk about their past. So a lot of identifying red flags, I like to call them pink flags, early on. And also just not only your non-negotiables that become a little clearer, like if they are mean is a really easy one. For example, how mean, like, are they mean? Do they want to talk about things? Are they the ones initiating? Like, hey, can we talk about this? Because it's weighing on my heart. But also, I think the idea of not only non-negotiables, but what do I like? I gave a really good example. I spontaneously rescued a dog the other day. And I thought, I'm going to add this to what might be something that is important, someone who is willing to do something like that. So, in the experiences of your life, what matches your values? You talked about that a lot, Grace. You did a whole inventory on your values. And so non-negotiable values, writing them down as you're in your hermiting or your self-dating stage.
Yes.
Great. Well, again, thank you both for being here. And Grace, again, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I think you give a lot of people hope and you're an inspiration. And again, thank you. And Claudia, thank you for your clinical expertise on this matter. We don't have any other questions, so I hope everybody enjoyed today's clinical conversation and will join us next month. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Courtney.